Hey, Salvador Brickman here. Welcome back to the Podcasting Hacks YouTube channel. This YouTube channel accompanies my blog, Podcasting Hacks, where I cover some tips and advice when it comes to podcasting and really figuring out this whole business. So I got started in podcasting in 2015 and I've learned a ton, man. And I want to pass on in this video discovering your authentic voice when it comes to podcasting and really how to get started with that. So I'm just gonna be 100% candid with you, okay? I'm not gonna put up any front or anything like that. When I was getting started, dude, like my voice was horrible. I sounded really monotone, very meek, very quiet, very unsure, uncertain, shy. Like I would use all these words to describe the way that I sounded, but I didn't really know what else to do. Like I needed to break into podcasting because I had a competitor that was doing a podcast and I didn't want him to get ahead of me. You know, I was started as a blogger and I was writing a lot at the time, but I couldn't get into podcasting because I just felt this huge fear, just insurmountable fear of having people around the world hear my voice. But because this other guy was doing it, I was like, I gotta get in. So I was almost pushed into the industry. And this is back in 2015. So I was just kind of getting started with podcasting. And the first thing that you do if you're uncertain is you try to mimic other people, right? So you're listening to another podcaster and you hear them and you're like, I want to sound like that. So I'm going to sound like that, right? And you start to kind of mimic that person. Maybe you have like this podcast style voice. You're talking like a radio broadcaster. But the problem is that it's not authentic. And what's more, the person's voice, that's their trademark. When you hear someone else's voice, like one of your loved ones, you know it's them talking. You know, you can recognize their voice. It is their trademark. The same thing is true of podcasting. When you are trying to mimic someone else, you're trying to basically commit trademark infringement. I hate to say it, but you are, you know? When someone hears you, they don't say, this sounds like Sal, this sounds like this person. They don't say that. They say, this sounds like you're trying to sound like this person, right? It sounds like you're trying to mimic this person. So it's really just good for the other person's brand. It's not good for you at all. And that's why developing your own authentic voice is so important when it comes to podcasting. So I kind of went initially from like trying to mimic other people and, you know, sounding not so great and sounding almost like a caricature. And I realized there was this moment in time where one of my listeners who really loved my stuff and got a lot of value out of it, he was like, why don't we do like a Skillshare kind of swap? Because I see you're trying to get into YouTube. At that time, I was trying to, with my other YouTube channel, get into YouTube. And he's like, hey, I can teach you a little bit about like filming and lighting and camera equipment and stuff. And maybe in turn, you can give me a little bit of advice on my business. And I was like, okay, that sounds pretty good. Because my podcast was all about crowdfunding and raising money and starting a new business and stuff. So, and I always would interview people that are kind of in that startup stage. So I was like, that sounds great. Like, I'll do that. So we ended up meeting up and I remember it was like the strangest thing because he said to me, dude, like you sound so different in person than you do in the podcast. And he didn't mean it in like a downward kind of way or like a criticizing way. It was almost like an epiphany, like you sound so different. And I was like, I do? Because like I didn't really know what I was talking about. I was like, I do? Like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, you just like, you sound very different on the podcast. And I was like, huh. And I kind of was having that like sinking feeling in my stomach, that imposter syndrome, like maybe you aren't as knowledgeable as you thought you were. But then he's like, I like you so much better like this. Like you sound so much more authentic. Why don't you talk that way on the podcast? And it blew my mind because I was like, wait, I thought I was supposed to talk in this way. I was supposed to talk like really fast, really loud and sound like this caricature, right? And the second he said that, like a real loyal listener who was in communication with me that was helping me out said I should sound more like my normal self, I was just blown away because I was trying to be engaging, but it wasn't really connecting as well. It wasn't working as well. So I went back to the drawing board. I started thinking to myself, what if I actually tried to discover my real voice? And if I put that out there, what would that sound like? And as I was starting to do this, there's so many things in the way, right? Because when you're trying to discover your authentic voice, first of all, you don't even know where to start. Like if you're not a vocal expert or you don't know how your normal voice even sounds because you haven't done a lot of public speaking or you haven't done a lot of podcasting, you just don't know, like, what is my real voice? Is this my real voice? Is that real? It's like, you don't know. And maybe you'll think back to moments in your life a little bit, you'll try to paste something together, but it's also very hard because the second you go live, the minute you go live on a podcast, the entire dynamic changes where you're suddenly live, like it's being recorded. You're talking with a real guest, a real individual who's maybe an expert in their field or a celebrity. And it's like, you start to freeze up and you kind of go back to your old ways. Whenever there's pressure on a human being, we tend to fall back to the level of our training. That's kind of like a more of a military term, that whenever there's pressure on you, you tend to revert to your old habits or the habits that have helped you survive to this point in time. And this is no different when you're going live with a podcast. So discovering your authentic voice is more than just learning about the components of voice. So lots of different components of voice, which kind of go beyond the scope of this video. It goes beyond that. But when it comes to your specific voice, it also comes into play the social dynamics. And let me kind of like get a little bit into that. What I mean by that is when you are talking with someone who's your friend, who you've known for many years, it's really easy for you to be authentic. It's very simple for you to talk confidently, to tell stories, to be funny, right? Your real self will come out with a friend. But the second you go into a room of strangers, or people you don't know, or your friend all of a sudden introduces you to a bunch of other childhood friends that they have, and you don't know these people, you maybe want to make a good impression, all of a sudden the way you start talking changes. Even your gestures, your body language, you feel a little bit more not so at ease. You feel a little bit more, tightness in your chest. If you're in like a networking event or something, it feels awkward, right? That's a very common way of describing it. It feels just kind of awkward. And as a result, the charisma which you project actually kind of decreases a little bit. It's almost like you're lowering the tone of a light bulb. Like it just starts to go a little bit more quiet. It starts to go not as bright. You're not shining as brightly in that environment when you don't feel so comfortable. And that's the exact same thing that happens on a podcast where you're on a show and normally you can talk, you can vibe. The second you go live, all of a sudden there's all this pressure on you to perform. And what we do is we kind of feel a little bit insecure and not so safe, and we want to shield ourselves from messing up. So we adopt a caricature, right? If you're a guy in the audience, you've ever like asked out a girl, this is really common. Like you adopt a caricature. If you're going on a job interview, maybe you adopt a caricature of who you are, and you put on a mask. And this mask is kind of meant to shield you. So you start talking a certain way, and you start having a certain cadence that's maybe not as natural to you. And the reason is that, number one, you think this is going to be more effective, but number two, you don't want to expose yourself entirely, and you don't want to be as authentic with your emotions, because as we all know, people can sense your emotions in your voice, and this all happens. So the process of going from meek monotone to, speaking in a caricature kind of way to eventually discovering my authentic voice, that happened over the course of time. But as I was going through this process, I was also taking notes, and I was figuring out what was working and what wasn't. And I basically boiled that all down into tangible tricks, techniques, and things that you can do to speed up this entire process. So this is one of the stuff that I include in the Perfect Podcasting Voice, a free course that I'm going to link to down below. But I also wanted to leave you with a bit of a tip when it comes to this, so that you can also speed up this framework. You don't necessarily have to opt in and watch some of these videos I'm going to be sharing with you. My biggest tip is that you need to kind of let go of this vision that you have of yourself, of needing to be someone other than you. That's really deep. That's really deep. But you need to let go, and you need to be comfortable with being who you are. You can't have self-loathing and also be authentic, unless you're authentic about your self-loathing, right? You can't be acting a way that you think is going to come across better and also be your authentic self. You can do different stuff, like you can modulate your volume, you can speak with more tempo and faster and more enunciation, these things, right? But at the end of the day, your voice is your voice, and you really have to be willing to embrace it. And by strengthening your voice, I think you'll have a lot more confidence about doing that. But as it relates to just you discovering your natural voice, you got to be willing to experiment a little bit. So experiment and discover your range, like going from low to high, and seeing the way that your voice can actually modulate itself. This isn't something that's really done very often in our society, unless you're a singer, right? Unless you're like a choir singer or something like that. You probably haven't even touched the surface of what your voice can do. So you have to be willing, number one, just psychologically, to be willing to let go of all of these things, these nervous tics, and finally be willing to be yourself. But from more of a practical, technique-based standpoint, you got to be willing to discover and to learn a little bit about your own voice. And the more you get to know that, the more you'll feel comfortable actually speaking in the way that you were born to speak, a normal and natural voice. And once I started to do this, I kid you not, I started to have people say to me, you have like a podcasting voice. Like when I would tell them that I do a podcast, it's like, that's perfect for you, man. Like you sound like you should have a podcast, or you sound like you have an amazing voice. You sound like you should have a podcast. And it was like the surrealist thing to me, because at that point in time, I didn't notice I had changed my voice at all, right? And I can actually even link down below to show you like a before and after. That might be interesting. So I'll do that. But I didn't even know my voice had changed, right? So people all of a sudden start to give me this real world feedback of like, you really know what you're talking about. You sound confident. You sound X, Y, and Z, all the things I was searching for. And it took me a while to fully even accept the fact that that transformation had happened, but also to accept the fact that this is, my authentic, real voice, and to be okay with that, and to have that be my brand and my trademark, and to be comfortable with that. It's almost like a little bit of a process that you go through internally to come to that realization. So I hope that you enjoyed this video and you took some actionable tips away from it. I urge you go and check out some of the links in the description. But if you did like this video, give me a thumbs up, and I'd love to hear from you if this resonates with you, if you also feel like you're on a journey to discover your voice. Leave a comment down below and let me know a little bit about you and your story and why it is that you want to do this. I think that is the most important. So thank you for joining me on this video. My name is Salvador. This is Podcasting Hacks, and I'll see you next time.